Frank Delaney finds another HOA notice nailed to his porch post, right next to the windchime his late wife made. A dry gust of wind stirred the leaves gathered at the steps, sending a few skittering down the walkway like they were in a hurry to be somewhere warmer. Frank didn't look up from his chair. The soft clinking of Annabelle's windchime, thin copper pipes and a glass heart that caught the morning sun, filled the porch with a gentle rhythm, like a conversation only he understood. He reached for his mug of coffee, still steaming, and let the heat settle in his hands before glancing at the paper tucked behind the rusted horseshoe nailed to the post. Another one. He unfolded the document slowly, the way one opens a letter from the bank, never expecting good news. Final notice, property compliance review pending, see revised annexation proposal enclosed. Below it, a colored map with thick red outlines appeared to loop his lot into the Green Ridge HOA jurisdiction. Again. The last time it had been a warning about visual disharmony caused by his mailbox's faded green paint. He'd ignored it, and the world kept turning. This time, they'd escalated. It wasn't just a warning. It was a claim. He sighed, pushed the brim of his hat back, and muttered, "Well, Annabelle, looks like we've been voted into a club we didn't join." Down the lane, beyond the row of maples that bordered the road like sentinels, a figure in a bright pink fleece vest and tennis skirt was waving. Clipboard in hand, she approached with her trademark pageant smile. Darla Winslow moved with purpose, her shoes too clean for someone living in a town with gravel roads. Her Range Rover gleamed at the curb like it had never seen dirt. Frank stood as she reached the porch gate. "Morning, Darla." "Frank," she chirped. "Oh, what a lovely day for community progress, don't you think?" He took a sip from his mug and waited. She held up the clipboard. "We've had a unanimous vote, well, a board consensus, technically, to integrate Sycamore Drive into the Green Ridge Covenant. It'll simplify things. Landscaping standards, mailbox uniformity, trash pickup hours. We already have trash pickup." "Well, yes, but this would help standardize the bins." He blinked. She smiled tighter. "Frank, the neighborhood is evolving. We can't have one lot lingering outside the guidelines. It disrupts continuity." He looked past her toward the edge of his lot, where his red barn stood exactly as it had for 37 years. "My property isn't part of Green Ridge, Darla." Her voice didn't falter. "With the new map, it would be. Retroactively." He chuckled, dry, low, and brief. "You can't redraw property lines with highlighters and handshakes." "It's not like that," she said, but the smile cracked just a hair. "The board approved it. You'll find the details in your packet." Frank nodded once. "I found it. Same place I found the last one. Next to a windchime my wife made." Darla tilted her head. "I think she'd have appreciated order." He raised an eyebrow. She appreciated quiet. For a beat, neither of them said anything. A neighbor across the street called to his dog. A delivery truck rattled down the hill. Darla's grip on her clipboard tightened. "Well," she said, retreating a step, "we'll look forward to your cooperation." Frank watched her leave. When the gate clicked shut, he eased back into his chair and stared out over his lawn. The windchime sang again. He closed his eyes and let the tune wash over him for a moment before standing. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and washed the town in gold, Frank sat at his kitchen table with a pad of paper, a pen, and a stack of manila folders. From the drawer beneath the coffee canister came a thick folder marked Property Survey, County Certified. He laid it flat, smoothing the corners. Later, as he stepped out onto the porch with a refill of coffee, he saw Mrs. Grant across the street watering her flower boxes. She waved. He nodded back and stepped down to the path between their homes. "Eileen," he called. "You still have that old fence diagram you mentioned?" She shaded her eyes. "The one from '88? Think so." "Why?" Frank held up the annexation map. "Looks like Darla wants a boundary war." He tapped the folder under his arm. "She's picked the wrong fence line." Frank sets his coffee down beside a stack of surveyor's documents labeled 1986 to 2020. Frank's gravel driveway is blocked by a red sports car with a pumpkin air freshener swinging from the rearview mirror. The car was shiny, low to the ground, and so out of place in Willow Creek it might as well have come with a "Not from around here" bumper sticker. It sat diagonally across Frank's driveway like a defiant piece in a game of parking chess. The little orange pumpkin dangling from the mirror bounced smugly with each breeze. Frank stood still, a box of nails in one hand, a faded ball cap in the other, blinking at the vehicle like it might vanish if he stared hard enough. It didn't. Behind it, nestled in the passenger side wiper, was a small laminated card, "Temporary parking approved, Willow Creek HOA, Harvest Fair volunteer permit." Frank took a slow step forward and reached for the card. The laminate crinkled slightly in his fingers. No signature. No license number. Just a printed sheet, clearly pulled from a home printer, bearing the faint watermark of the HOA's latest logo, a cartoon pumpkin in front of a white picket fence. A logo he hadn't voted for. Or ever acknowledged. The driveway, as always, was his. Had been since 1986, just like the deed said. He let out a long breath and glanced at the barn in the distance. The lumber he needed to repair the north wall was sitting in a lot downtown. The pickup, however, wasn't going anywhere unless it sprouted wings, or unless someone moved the gleaming red blockade. Frank shook his head, turned on his heel, and walked back toward the porch. Inside, he set the box of nails down on the table beside his coffee mug. Then, as if by muscle memory, he picked up his wallet and keys, swapped his work boots for loafers, and grabbed his light jacket. 10 minutes later, he was strolling down Main Street under banners that read "Willow Creek Harvest Fair, 42 years strong." Maggie's diner sat on the corner, just where it always had. The front windows were fogged from the warmth inside. The smell of bacon, biscuits, and apples drifted onto the sidewalk. Maggie herself, red apron tied snug and hair curled into submission, stood behind the counter pouring coffee for the mailman. "Sugar," she called as Frank walked in. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Or worse, Tyler Winslow. Frank eased onto a stool. "Close enough. There's a red car in my driveway with an air freshener the shape of a gourd. Pumpkin. Smells like smug." Maggie snorted and handed him a fresh mug. "He's been zipping around all week pretending he's in the Macy's parade. Darla swears he's volunteering for the festival. She also said my scarecrow was facing the wrong direction last fall." Maggie leaned forward conspiratorially. "Bet you $5 she wrote that parking pass on her lunch break with a glitter pen." Frank took a sip, the warmth grounding him. "You take bets in baked goods?" "Only when I win." She slid a wrapped slice of apple pie into a paper bag and set it beside him. "For the road." He tipped his hat. Better pie than politics, any day. When he got home, the car was still there, unmoved. Tyler was nowhere to be seen. Frank stepped inside, fetched his old camera from the pantry drawer, the one he used to document repairs, and walked outside again with quiet purpose. Click. The car from the side. Click. The windshield note. Click. The rear license plate, just for good measure. Inside, he uploaded the photos to his computer and opened a new email. The recipient, Sheriff Malcolm. The subject, parking policy clarification. No exclamation marks. No dramatic accusations. Just facts. Attached, he included the 3 images with a short line. "Please advise whether this permit meets county code standards." He hit send. Later that afternoon, as Frank swept leaves from the porch, Mrs. Grant waved from across the street. "Trouble with your driveway?" she called. "Tyler seems to be resting his wheels," Frank answered. She looked around, then leaned over her railing, voice lower. "Darla said you'd fold soon. That you'd see it was easier to join in." Frank arched an eyebrow. "Easier isn't always better." Mrs. Grant smiled. "That's why you're still here, Frank." When the sun began to dip behind the ridge, painting everything in honey light, Frank returned inside. He moved slowly, deliberately, placing the pie Maggie had given him in the fridge. Then he walked to his bookshelf, pulled down the thick binder labeled HOA, Green Ridge, and flipped to the bylaws Darla herself had mailed him last spring. He read through them, highlighting 3 sections with a fine-tip pen. Afterward, he printed a copy of the entire document, stacked it neatly beside his mug, and laid the orange parking pass on top. Frank prints a copy of the HOA's own bylaws and places them next to his coffee mug. The red car is still there. But Frank has made up his mind, and one quiet call. The wind carried a crisp, clean bite that hinted at the frost to come, rustling through the gold-tipped maple leaves as Frank stepped onto the porch. The mug in his hand was fresh and hot, the kind of morning brew that didn't ask for sugar but offered quiet assurance all the same. He didn't glance at the driveway, he didn't need to. The red car hadn't moved. He sat down slowly in the wooden rocker, placing the mug on the side table next to the laminated HOA bylaws and yesterday's folded email printout. His fingers hovered over the phone in his shirt pocket. He tapped once, then twice, scrolling through the short list of contacts. When the name Malcolm appeared, he pressed call. The voice on the other end answered before the second ring. Sheriff's office, Malcolm speaking. Morning, Frank said. Just need that favor you once offered. There was a pause, followed by the faint shuffle of papers. Driveway still blocked. Same car. Same note. Still no authority. I'll make a call, Malcolm said, voice calm but sure. You got documentation? Photos, bylaws, and my original deed. Perfect, Malcolm said. Stay put. Give me 15. Frank hung up, stood, and stepped back inside. 10 minutes later, the distant hum of a diesel engine rolled through the stillness. Frank stepped out as a flatbed tow truck eased to a stop in front of his house. The driver, a tall man in coveralls with a neatly trimmed beard and sunglasses that reflected the bright Tennessee sun, climbed out with a clipboard. You Delaney? He asked. That's me, Frank said, handing over a folder. Deed, photos, and an email from the sheriff. The driver flipped through the documents and nodded. You weren't kidding. This is tighter than a bank foreclosure. He glanced at the red car and smirked. Fastest clean pull I've done all year. Frank chuckled. Want some cider? The driver blinked. Cider? Frank disappeared briefly inside, returning with a stainless steel thermos and a paper cup. The man took it like he was accepting communion. Within moments, the winch hummed, the red car lifted at an angle, tires rolling gently onto the flatbed. There was no scraping, no shouting, only the quiet mechanical choreography of legal consequences in motion. Mrs. Grant, wrapped in a shawl, rocked on her porch across the street. When the car's rear tires lifted off the gravel completely, she clapped once. Slow. Deliberate. Frank raised his cup slightly in her direction. Just as the tow truck began its cautious reverse, another car whipped around the corner and skidded to a stop. Tyler emerged, phone in hand, mouth already forming the beginnings of protest. Hey! Hey! You can't just... He froze when he saw Frank standing calmly beside the driver, both sipping cider. Frank said nothing. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a clear plastic sleeve, and handed it over. Inside, a printed map with a bold black border and a header that read HOA jurisdiction, as filed. Tyler opened his mouth again, but the tow truck's engine revved, swallowing his next words as the red car disappeared down the hill. Moments later, Darla arrived, less dramatic but no less furious. She strode up the walk, heels tapping like judgment. Her lips were pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. This is absurd, she hissed. That was an authorized vehicle. I'm bringing this to the board. Frank took a slow sip and smiled. Oh, do bring minutes. I'll bring my lawyer. She turned to leave, sputtering under her breath, but Frank was already walking up his porch steps. Inside, he crossed the living room to the bookshelf and retrieved the thick, worn folder marked Property Records. He brought it to the kitchen, cleared a space on the table, and gently opened it. He removed the oldest sheet, the original deed, signed and stamped 1986. Beside it, he set a small photo frame, Annabelle, smiling wide, hair tied back, standing in front of the barn they had painted together. Frank pulls out the original 1986 deed and lays it across his kitchen table, next to a photo of his wife. Darla shows up with backup, 3 HOA board members and a binder of printed infractions. The sun was already casting long shadows across the front lawn when Frank noticed the flicker of movement beyond the oak tree at the edge of his property. A small group was approaching, slow and deliberate, like a parade that didn't know it had no audience. Darla led the way in her pressed slacks and quilted vest, a thick binder clutched tight to her chest. Behind her marched 3 HOA board members, each holding what appeared to be clipboards and folding chairs. Frank stayed in his porch chair, the rocking gentle, almost meditative. He didn't blink when they fanned out in front of his steps, unfolded their chairs, and set up a narrow card table just outside the garden line. A gust of wind stirred the corners of Darla's paperwork, but she pressed them flat with the palm of her hand. Mrs. Grant stood behind her screen door across the street, a mixing bowl in one hand, peeking through like she was watching live theater. A few other neighbors lingered on their porches, pretending to water plants or sweep steps, their eyes very much not on the brooms. Darla cleared her throat. Mr. Delaney, we are convening a disciplinary review in accordance with Article 6, Section 4 of the Green Ridge Homeowners Charter. Frank glanced at her, then back down to the newspaper resting on his knee. Didn't realize I was being reviewed. I haven't even auditioned. She held up the binder. Infractions have been noted. Specifically, unauthorized fencing, deviation from neighborhood harmony protocols, and disruption of HOA-approved parking access. Frank nodded slowly, set his mug down on the rail, and leaned forward. Which section addresses harmony? And could you cite the statute on fencing? Darla blinked. It's in the amendment package, Appendix B. Appendix B, Frank repeated, rising and moving to the screen door. One moment. He returned with a manila folder, thick with age and ink. The top was labeled in black marker, Zoning and Jurisdiction, Willow Creek County. He handed a printed copy to each board member with the same calm he might use offering a casserole dish. They accepted them with varying levels of confusion. I believe you'll find, Frank said, that my land is listed here, Lot 19, under county designation, purchased and registered in 1986. The HOA was established in 2004. Darla's jaw tightened. With the revised map, we've integrated surrounding properties to maintain continuity. It was approved by the board. One of the men sitting beside her, a round-faced fellow with thick glasses and a constantly tapping pen, looked down at the deed, then back at the map in Darla's binder. I don't remember voting on this, he said, his voice low, uncertain. Darla spun toward him. It was part of the emergency meeting, via email. Another member furrowed her brow. That email had no attachments. You said you'd handle the formalities. Frank said nothing. He didn't need to. Mrs. Grant, appearing at the edge of her lawn, waved a small plate above her head. Frank, rhubarb pie, still warm. He walked over, accepted it with a smile, and returned to his seat on the porch, unfazed by the tribunal slowly unraveling in front of him. Darla tried to recover. Regardless, you are still out of compliance. According to which legal boundary, he asked, still calm. She opened her mouth, but her voice cracked slightly. This is about community standards. Respect. Cooperation. Frank looked over the documents again, then up at the others. Well, he said, respect starts with honest maps. A sudden vibration from his phone broke the moment. He glanced down at the screen. Email, County Clerk, confirmation of private status. Frank's phone buzzes, email subject, County Clerk, confirmation of private status. Frank walks into the Willow County Courthouse, folder in hand and quiet resolve in his step. The courthouse hadn't changed in 30 years. Same creaking wooden floorboards, same brass doorknobs, same faint scent of floor polish mixed with dusty paperwork and overbrewed coffee. The ceiling fans spun lazily above the foyer, stirring a whisper of warm air scented faintly with maple from the trees lining the street outside. Frank paused just past the entryway, adjusted his collar, and looked down at the manila folder he'd carried since sunrise. Inside it, survey maps, property deeds, HOA bylaws, and a printout of yesterday's email from the county. He moved forward with purpose, the echo of his steps swallowed quickly by the paneled hallway. The clerk's office sat in the corner of the building, glass window cracked open to the hallway. A small bell dinged as he opened the door. "Morning," said a woman in a sage-green cardigan, glancing up from behind the counter. Her nameplate read, C. Elkins, County Records. "Frank Delaney," he said, offering the folder. "Appointment about zoning jurisdiction." She nodded, took the folder with practiced hands, and opened it. "You called about the HOA encroachment?" He gave a half-smile. "More like annexation by newsletter." Elkins chuckled. "You're not the first they've tried to steamroll." She motioned toward a coffee maker humming on a side table. "Help yourself." He poured a small cup, the scent grounding. When he returned, she was already lining up documents on the counter. "Lot 19, she said. "Registered 1986. County certified, pre-subdivision, no HOA overlay jurisdiction. And here," she tapped a page, "here's the original plat, and here's the overlay that was never recorded with the assessor. They can't enforce HOA regs on you. Not legally. Not even close." Frank nodded slowly. "I'd like a stamped certification." She turned to the back room. "Jerry," she called. "Can you get me a CR 72 for lot 19? A younger man, deputy recorder, appeared within moments and began typing. As the paperwork processed, Frank let his eyes wander. A community board near the door featured a hand-pinned flyer from Maggie's Diner, Harvest Fair Pie Contest, entry due Friday. Her signature cursive handwriting looped large across the bottom. The clerk handed him a crisp printout with an embossed seal. "There you go. Official as rain. Want a copy emailed, too? Please." As he slipped the certificate into his folder, his phone buzzed. It was Maddie. He stepped just outside the door before answering. "Mornin', Mad." "Hey, Uncle Frank," she said, voice brisk. "I've reviewed their HOA charter. The way they're enforcing is shaky, non-binding in lots adjacent to non-voluntary parcels. Also, they're using town letterhead on HOA materials." Frank smiled. "Using the town's stationery?" "Yep," she said. "That's leverage. I'm drafting something. Sit tight. Appreciate it." Before hanging up, she added, "Also, get markers installed. The physical kind." "Already asking," he said, then looked back toward the door. "They're printing the request now." Outside, as Frank walked down the courthouse steps, the town looked the same but felt different. He passed the bulletin board near the sidewalk. On it, freshly stapled between flyers for lawn care and lost cats, was a new announcement in bold, "Residents' rights and property boundaries, free workshop this Saturday." He stopped and read the full sheet. A quiet grin pulled at the corner of his mouth. When he returned home, the mailbox was leaning just a touch off-center. He reached to straighten it, and noticed a thick white paper fluttering against the gate. It had been taped with packing tape and printed in bold black letters. Subject to HOA disciplinary follow-up, failure to comply. Back home, a notice has been taped to Frank's gate, subject to HOA disciplinary follow-up, failure to comply. Frank wakes to orange cones across his driveway and a handwritten "No entry, HOA review in progress" sign. The sun had barely crested over the trees when Frank stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and saw it, a neat line of orange traffic cones stretched across the mouth of his gravel driveway, like miniature sentinels blocking the day. In their center, a plywood stake held a sign in thick red marker, "No entry, HOA review in progress." The handwriting was unmistakable, too neat to be hasty, too dramatic to be casual. Frank took a long sip, letting the warmth steady his pulse. He walked down the steps, boots crunching against the dry leaves, and stood just short of the first cone. No vehicles were parked nearby. Whoever had come to deliver this statement had done so early and left quickly. He turned at the sound of tires on gravel. A sedan pulled up, kicking dust behind it. From the driver's side emerged Maddie, blazer over jeans, sunglasses perched on her head, a small rolling suitcase in tow. Her heels clicked softly as she approached the porch. "Morning," she said, eyeing the cones. "Subtle." Frank nodded once. HOA's got flair. No budget for boundaries, though. She set down the suitcase, pulled her phone from her blazer pocket, and began recording, sweeping slow shots of the cones, the sign, and the mailbox. Then she switched to stills. "I'll want angles from the county road, too," she murmured. "Especially with that sign. They're implying jurisdiction." Frank raised an eyebrow. "They're implying a lot these days." He held the porch door open, and Maddie stepped inside long enough to drop her suitcase by the umbrella stand. When they returned to the porch, a familiar Range Rover pulled up at the curb. Darla stepped out in a belted jacket and heeled boots better suited to a showroom than a small town street. She crossed the lawn with purpose, binder clutched tight. "This is overreach," she declared, not bothering with greetings. "We've issued proper notice. The board has reviewed the maps. These proceedings are part of our compliance schedule." Frank said nothing. Maddie didn't either, just lifted her phone and began recording again. Darla faltered. "We're not afraid of your city lawyers." Maddie adjusted her sunglasses, still silent. From the corner, two HOA board members lingered near a borrowed golf cart, watching. One of them, the man with glasses from earlier, shifted uncomfortably. "You have no authority here," Maddie said, her tone calm and flat. "This is private property. You are trespassing. And the cones are an obstruction under county code." Darla crossed her arms. "We're maintaining order." "You're manufacturing chaos," Maddie replied, lowering her phone. At that moment, a sheriff's cruiser rolled down the road and pulled to a soft stop. Malcolm stepped out, hat under one arm, coffee thermos in the other. He looked at the cones, then at the sign, then at Frank. "Busy morning?" Frank nodded. "Same show. Different props." Maddie walked over and handed Malcolm a flash drive. "Photos, footage, time-stamped. HOA overstepping declared boundaries. Impeding vehicle access. Possibly tampering with signage." He slid the drive into his pocket, turned to Darla, and leaned slightly forward. "You sure this is the hill you want to fence?" Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. The silence stretched. Then Malcolm tipped his hat. "Just checking," he said, and returned to his cruiser. As the engine faded into the distance, Darla spun on her heel and marched back to the Range Rover. The board members hesitated a moment longer, then followed, the cart whispering behind them. Later that morning, Frank and Maddie sat side by side on the porch, thermoses of warm cider in hand. The cones were gone, stacked neatly against the fence. The sign lay discarded by the trash bin. Mrs. Grant walked across the yard with something small folded in her palm. She didn't say anything, just stepped onto the porch and laid it gently on the railing, a faded American flag triangle, the kind handed to veterans. Frank looked at it for a long moment. He nodded. She returned across the lawn without a word. As the wind picked up, rustling the trees, Maddie turned slightly toward Frank, her voice quiet. "Tomorrow," she said with a faint smile, "we go federal." Maddie turns to Frank, smiles faintly, "Tomorrow, we go federal." At sunrise, boundary stakes appear across Frank's property line, bright red flags fluttering in silent protest. They weren't there the night before. Frank would have noticed. But when the first blush of morning spilled over the trees, the red flags stood out like warning signs from a different war, each one planted with theatrical precision every 6 feet along the fence line. At the base of every third flag, a laminated sign flapped in the breeze, this property is currently non-compliant, Green Ridge HOA review pending. Frank stood on the porch, arms crossed, the steam from his coffee curling into the crisp autumn air. Behind him, the porch door opened with a soft creak. Maddie stepped out, wrapped in a thick shawl, mug in hand. "You know," she said, scanning the sea of fluttering plastic, "they could have just sent a postcard." Frank grunted. "They've moved from fiction to performance art." Down the road, the Willow Creek Harvest Fair was already waking up. Tents popped up in colorful stripes, vendors unpacked crates of baked goods and preserves, and the air carried hints of cinnamon, apple, and fresh kettle corn. Children's laughter bounced down the street, mixing with distant fiddles and the soft clinking of cider mugs. The Green Ridge HOA had a booth near the main stage, a white table covered in pamphlets, trifold displays, and now, a large vinyl map stretched across an easel. It showed the neighborhood in bright color-coded zones, and somehow, Frank's lot had been painted over with a soft, HOA-friendly blue. Maddie walked straight toward it, legal folder tucked under her arm like a shield. Frank followed at a distance, choosing instead to greet familiar faces along the way, Mrs. Grant at the pie tent, Maggie pouring cider, a young family from the next street over admiring the woodworking contest. He handed out small copies of the certified survey, folded neatly in half. "Just clearing up confusion," he said, each time. "No pitch. No sermon." At the HOA booth, Maddie plucked a flyer from the table and read it aloud. "Property Realignment Initiative, Unifying Our Vision." She looked up, unimpressed. "Catchy." Darla appeared from behind the booth, hair stiff with hairspray, eyes sharp. "It's public information." "It's misinformation," Maddie replied, producing a yellow envelope. "This is a formal cease and desist. One for you. One for the board." She handed over a second envelope to the stunned man beside Darla. Then, without raising her voice, she turned to the small crowd forming nearby. "This property has been confirmed by the county as privately owned and not subject to HOA oversight. Any further interference constitutes harassment and will be pursued accordingly." Just then, Sheriff Malcolm approached, county inspector in tow. The inspector carried a binder and a measuring rod. They made their way to Frank's booth, now drawing more interest than the pie-eating contest. Malcolm crouched near a faded wooden stake, then gestured toward the ground. "Official marker," he said, tapping the edge with his boot. "Right here. Always has been." Darla's eyes widened. "But the map?" The inspector shook his head. "The map you distributed isn't recognized. This survey's certified and recorded. You're outside your jurisdiction." The board members looked at one another. One, a thin woman with wind-blown hair and a red cardigan, removed her name tag and dropped it onto the table. "I didn't sign off on this," she said. "I'm done." Murmurs spread. Darla's voice cracked. "This isn't over." But no one followed her. Frank approached the county inspector with a paper plate. "Peach pie," he said. "Local favorite." The man blinked, then smiled. "Appreciated." As the sun climbed higher, Maggie stepped onto the small stage beside the cider tent and tapped the mic. "Pie contest results are in." A cheer went up. Frank and Maddie turned, walking slowly toward the stage, the red flags forgotten. Behind them, Mrs. Grant walked the line of stakes one by one, plucking them from the ground like weeds. She carried them in a bundle and, without a word, dropped the whole armful into the fairgrounds recycling bin. Frank and Maddie walk away as Maggie announces pie contest winners. A cheer erupts, unrelated to Darla's chaos. Early Sunday morning, Frank mounts a hand-carved wooden sign beside his gate, "Private property, blessed and unbothered since 1986. The porch swing creaked in the stillness, the only sound beside a soft bird call and the distant rustle of leaves high in the trees. The sun filtered low through the branches, casting warm amber light across the gravel driveway. It was the kind of morning Willow Creek was known for, quiet, unrushed, with air that smelled faintly of maple and damp earth. Frank stood at the edge of the yard, socket wrench in hand, adjusting the final bolt on the thick wooden post. The sign, freshly stained and carved with care, gleamed with understated defiance. Each letter had been etched by hand, the grain of the cedar warm beneath the soft gold finish. Private property. Blessed and unbothered since 1986. Beside him, Maddie knelt and tightened the lower bolt with the steadiness of someone used to courtroom precision. She stepped back, brushing her palms on her jeans. "Straight enough for a judge," she said. Frank nodded once. "More permanent than paperwork." Across the street, Mrs. Grant ambled over with a folded slip of paper in her hand. She offered it to Frank without a word. Inside was a photograph, yellowed with time, a row of houses, some not yet painted, front yards still wild with spring grass. Frank recognized his own home, and just barely, a younger version of himself in overalls holding a paint roller beside Annabelle. She found that during her last deep clean, Mrs. Grant said, eyes glinting. "Wanted you to have it." Said it was the last time she remembered the street being ours. Frank took the photo and studied it for a moment before slipping it into his shirt pocket. One by one, neighbors began to appear. They came quietly, coffee mugs in hand, no lawn chairs, no small talk, just a presence. Maggie handed Frank a blueberry muffin wrapped in napkin. The retired librarian from Oak Street gave a thumbs up. Someone else dropped a jar of homemade apple butter on the porch steps with a sticky note that read simply, "Thanks." Across the road, the Range Rover idled, a faint mist puffing from the tailpipe. Inside, Darla sat rigid in the driver's seat. The back window was filled with cardboard boxes, a long plastic garment bag slung across the rear. Her Queenichoa license plate caught the light like a mirror before disappearing behind the car's shadow. She didn't wave. She didn't get out. She simply pulled away, tires whispering over gravel, shrinking into the quiet like a bad idea finally backing down. Sheriff Malcolm arrived not long after, stepping out of his cruiser with a clipboard and an easy gait. He approached Frank with a small nod. "It's official," he said. "HOA's suspended pending full review. Most of the boards resigned. The rest are being advised not to communicate until counsel is present." Frank only nodded. "They won't be back," Malcolm added. "Not like before." Maddie leaned against the gatepost, arms crossed, watching the road where Darla's SUV had vanished. "They'll rebrand," she said softly. "But they'll think twice before showing up with stakes and cones." Frank stepped forward and wiped a small smudge of dust from the corner of the sign with the side of his thumb. He looked at it for a long time, then said quietly, "She'd have liked this, Annabelle." Behind them, a compact SUV slowed as it passed the property. A man leaned out the passenger window and squinted at the sign. "Now that's a statement," he said with a grin. His wife laughed. "Should have brought the camera." They drove off, laughter trailing behind them like a breeze. Frank turned toward the porch, the morning sun warming his back. He sipped from his mug, still hot. The breeze picked up just enough to set the windshield clinking again, a soft, familiar tune. He looked down the driveway. And for the first time in weeks, the driveway stayed clear. On a quiet Sunday morning, the last of the red flags came down, and a wooden sign stood where a battle once brewed. No speeches were made, no fireworks marked the moment, just neighbors sipping coffee, sharing muffins, and nodding with something like relief. In the end, it wasn't anger or shouting that changed things, it was patience, persistence, and a willingness to stand firm with grace. When power tries to redraw the lines of fairness, even a small porch can become a stronghold of principle. Like a lantern left burning on a quiet fence post, one peaceful stand can light the way for a whole neighborhood.